Imagine you're running a marathon, right?
Okay.
You cross the finish line, you break the tape, you get handed a bottle of water, do a quick press interview. You go home, take a long shower, eat a full dinner, and like an hour later, you finally turn on the TV just in time to see the second place runner coming into view.
Yeah, that sounds completely absurd.
It does.
Yeah.
But the thing is, in the 2011 Hindi film box office,
Yeah.
that is pretty much exactly what happened.
It really is.
So today we are taking you on a deep dive into a highly specific, raw spreadsheet. We're looking at the top 10 highest grossing Hindi films of 2011.
Unpacking the exact box office collections, the US dollar conversions, and honestly, the corporate architecture behind these massive hits.
Yeah, we are treating this data like a financial archaeological dig. By looking at these numbers, we can uncover the exact blueprint of what it took to dominate a rapidly changing industry.
And the 2011 box office is just the perfect cross-section to examine for this.
Why that year specifically?
Well, because the industry was caught in this massive transitional phase, multiplexes were rapidly expanding in the urban centers, which was driving up average ticket prices. But at the same time, the single-screen theaters in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities still held immense power for mass-market films.
Right.
Plus, you had international distribution becoming a core pillar of revenue, rather than just like an afterthought. So when we look at these final gross collections, we aren't just seeing popularity contests. We are looking at complex economic strategies playing out in real time across a very fractured dual market landscape.
Exactly. And before we dive into the numbers, we need to make sure you, the listener, understand the scale we're operating on here. The data we have measures domestic and international success in crores.
Right.
For context, if you aren't familiar with the South Asian numbering system, a crore is 10 million. So when we say a movie made 100 crore rupees, we're talking about 1 billion rupees.
It's a massive, massive psychological and financial benchmark.
Oh, absolutely. And in 2011, the film sitting at the absolute peak of the mountain didn't just cross that benchmark, it completely shattered it.
Yeah, it really did.
The #1 highest grossing Hindi film that year was Bodyguard, backed by Reliance Entertainment real-life production. The gross collection was an astronomical 252.99 crore rupees.
Wow.
Yeah. In US dollars, that equates to 54.21 million.
And to really grasp the gravity of that 252.99 crore figure, you have to look at the film sitting right beneath it.
The runner-up.
Exactly. The #2 film of the year was Ra.One, which was produced by Red Chillies Entertainment. It grossed 207 crore rupees, or roughly 44.35 million US dollars.
Yeah.
And then trailing just slightly behind that was #3, Dawn 2. That was backed by Reliance Entertainment, Excel Entertainment, and Film Base Berlin, bringing in a 202.81 crore rupees. So that's about $43.45 million.
See, this is what brings me back to that marathon analogy.
Yeah.
Because Bodyguard didn't just win the year, it completely obliterated the runner-up, Ra.One, by over 45 crore rupees.
Which is just a staggering gap.
Right. That gap alone, just the empty space between first and second place, is roughly equivalent to 10 million US dollars. That is an entire mid-budget film's lifetime gross just sitting in the margin.
Yeah, it really puts it in perspective.
It does. So how does a gap like that even materialize? Especially when you consider that Ra.One was heavily marketed as this like VFX heavy, groundbreaking superhero spectacle.
Right.
While Bodyguard was a much more traditional formulaic action romance movie.
Well, it all comes down to market penetration versus market saturation.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So Ra.One maximized its revenue in urban multiplexes where the ticket prices were premium. It basically saturated the high-end market.
Got it.
But Bodyguard achieved total penetration. It performed exceptionally well in the multiplexes, sure, but it also ran to packed houses in rural and semi-urban single screens for weeks.
Oh,
Yeah. When you combine a massive festival release window, which in this case was Eve, with a product engineered to appeal to both a family in Mumbai and a daily wage worker in a Tier 3 town, the multiplier effect on the gross collection is exponential.
right.
Bodyguard didn't just sell expensive tickets, it sold an impossible volume of tickets.
So that 45 crore gap isn't just a measure of popularity, it's a measure of footprint.
Exactly.
It shows us that in 2011, the absolute ceiling for a multiplex-heavy film was around that 200 to 207 crore mark.
Yes.
To break past that and hit 250 crore, you fundamentally needed the single-screen audiences. And it's fascinating because only 3 films managed to cross that 200 crore threshold that year: Bodyguard, Ra.One, and Dawn 2.
And that 200 crore mark, it acts as an invisible structural barrier in the industry. Hitting it isn't just a happy accident,
What do you mean?
I mean, it requires a machine. You need a massive marketing budget, a global distribution network, and the leverage to force theaters to give you the maximum number of screens on opening weekend.
Right.
If a studio can reliably push a film past 200 crore, the financial markets view that studio completely differently. Their valuation changes, their ability to secure loans changes.
Which perfectly explains why a massive conglomerate would want to monopolize that top tier.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we look at the corporate architecture behind these numbers, a very clear, very aggressive strategy emerges. Reliance Entertainment essentially just bought the podium.
They really did.
In a list of the top 10 highest grossing films, Reliance had a hand in 3 of them. They backed the #1 film, Bodyguard, at 252.99 crore.
Yeah.
They co-produced the #3 film, Dawn 2, at 202.81 crore. And they solely backed the #6 film on the list, Singham, which pulled in 147.89 crore rupees, or $31.69 million.
And what you're seeing there is basically the application of modern portfolio theory, but applied to the unpredictable business of making art.
That's a great way to put it.
Because Reliance Entertainment isn't just an independent film studio, it's a branch of a massive multinational conglomerate. They brought Wall Street mechanics to the box office.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
Well, instead of betting everything on one movie and just praying it works, they capitalized a massive slate of films. By funding Bodyguard, Dawn 2, and Singham, they are diversifying their risk across different release dates and totally different target demographics.
I see the logic there, but honestly, isn't that incredibly dangerous for the health of the industry as a whole?
How so?
Well, if one conglomerate can essentially flood the zone with hundreds of millions of dollars, they drive up the cost of marketing and distribution for everyone else.
Right.
They force theaters into these predatory revenue sharing agreements because the theater needs Dawn 2 and Bodyguard just to keep the lights on. It looks less like portfolio diversification and more like a hostile takeover of the entire theatrical calendar.
I mean, it definitely consolidates power, you're right about that. But you also have to consider the liquidity crisis that often plagues film industries.
Okay, fair.
Before conglomerates like Reliance entered the space, film financing was notoriously volatile. It was heavily reliant on independent financiers who were charging exorbitant interest rates.
Right, it was much more fragile.
Exactly. A single flop could bankrupt a legacy production house. So, Reliance's approach, this monopolistic dominance, it injected reliable institutional capital into the market.
Oh, I see.
They had the bankroll to weather a 50 crore loss on a bad bet, which allowed them to greenlight massive, ambitious projects that smaller studios wouldn't dare touch.
So they're playing the casino whale.
Pretty much.
They walk up to the blackjack table, buy out 5 seats, and play 5 hands simultaneously. Even if the dealer takes 2 hands, the whale is walking away profitable because Bodyguard just paid out 252 crore.
Exactly.
And we see another powerhouse, Excel Entertainment, playing a similar, slightly more targeted game.
Yes, they do.
They co-produced Dawn 2 with Reliance, but they also co-produced the #5 film, Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, alongside Eros International.
Which was a massive hit.
Yeah. That film grossed 163 crore rupees, or $34.92 million. So the top tier is largely defined by these massive, well-capitalized players.
But you know, that strategy requires an immense amount of upfront capital, which is why the data points us toward an entirely different survival mechanism sitting right in the middle of this list.
Exactly. This brings us to the structural outlier. #4 on the list is a film called Ready.
Ready.
It grossed a massive 180 crore rupees, or $38.57 million. It handily beat out Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara and Singham.
It did!
But when you look at the production credits, it wasn't backed by a Reliance or an Excel. The production of Ready required a sprawling coalition of 5 separate entities.
5 entities.
Yeah. T-Series Films, Sohail Khan Productions, One Up Entertainment, Raw Whale Grandsons Entertainment and Software, and Wave Cinemas.
It is the complete antithesis of the Reliance model.
It totally is. You know, it actually reminds me of how maritime insurance syndicates operated in the 1700s.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, back then, outfitting a merchant ship to sail across the world was incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And the risk of pirates or storms was so high that no single merchant wanted to own the whole ship.
Because if it sinks, you lose everything.
Exactly, you were ruined. So 5 merchants would get together and each buy a 20% stake in the voyage.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
If the ship makes it to port, or in this case, if the film grossed 180 crore, everyone gets a smaller but guaranteed slice of the profit. None of them get incredibly rich off that single voyage, but nobody goes bankrupt either.
That is a perfect analogy, because the mechanism you're describing was an evolutionary necessity in 2011.
Because of the cost.
Because of the skyrocketing above the line costs, the lead actor's salary, the director's fee, the location costs, these figures were just ballooning.
Right.
A single independent producer couldn't secure the 60 or 70 crore needed just to start the cameras rolling. So you bring in T-Series, who might front capital in exchange for the lucrative music rights. And then you bring in Wave Cinemas, who might leverage their distribution network to guarantee screens in specific territories. Every entity in that 5-company coalition brought either specific capital or a specific operational asset to the table.
But wait, doesn't that inherently dilute the ultimate goal?
In what way?
Well, the spreadsheet tells us Ready grossed 180 crore, which sounds fantastic. But gross box office is just the money handed to the ticket counter, right? The theaters take roughly half of that immediately.
That's correct.
So the distributor share, the money actually returning to the producers, is maybe 90 crore. If you then have to split that 90 crore among 5 different production companies after subtracting the massive marketing and production costs, are any of these companies actually making a meaningful profit?
That's the big question.
Or is this just like a too big to fail vanity exercise?
Well, I mean, it is absolutely a game of diluted margins, but you have to weigh that against the alternative, which is just extinction. If those 5 companies don't pool their resources, the movie never gets made. Furthermore, they aren't splitting the gross equally. Like I mentioned, the syndication is often compartmentalized.
Right, the music rights.
Exactly. T-Series might make an absolute fortune on the digital and physical music sales, which aren't fully captured in the theatrical gross.
Oh, I see.
Another partner might hold the satellite television rights, which in 2011 were becoming incredibly lucrative. So the theatrical box office of 180 crore acts as the marketing engine that drives up the value of those secondary revenue streams.
Okay, so the 180 crore theatrical gross is almost like a giant billboard advertising the film's success,
Yes.
which then allows the individual syndicate members to cash in on their specific slices of the pie.
Right.
The music, the TV rights, the overseas distribution.
Precisely.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's really 2 completely different species evolving to survive in the exact same harsh environment.
That's a great way to look at it.
You have the monolithic, heavily armored corporate giant in Reliance, and you have the agile, interconnected syndicate model in Ready. And both strategies successfully place a film in the top 5.
They did. But, as we move past the 130 crore mark and look at the bottom half of the list, both of those models face a harsh reality check.
Totally.
The massive 45 crore gaps we saw at the top of the mountain, they completely vanish.
Yeah, the air gets very thin, very quickly down there.
Let's look at the final 4 films that managed to scrape into the top 10.
Let's do it.
At number 7, we have The Dirty Picture, produced by Balaji Motion Pictures ALT Entertainment, grossing 130 crore rupees, or $27.85 million.
Okay.
Number 8 is Rockstar, backed by Shri Ashtavinayak Cinevision, Shri Ashtavinayak LFS Infra, and Eros International, coming in at 108.70 crore rupees, or $23.29 million.
And notice the drop off there.
Yeah.
We went from Bodyguard at 252 crore down to Rockstar at 108 crore. The gross collection has more than halved, but we are still inside the top 10 highest grossing films of the entire year. Right, and it only gets tighter from there. Number 9 is Murder 2, produced by Vishish Films, at 105 crore rupees, which is $22.5 million.
Yep.
And finally, the film that closed the door behind it, number 10, is Delhi Belly, produced by UTV Motion Pictures and Amir Khan Productions, grossing 103 crore rupees, or $22.07 million.
The clustering in those final 3 positions is honestly the most revealing piece of data on the entire spreadsheet.
It's a literal photo finish. I mean, the difference between Rockstar at number 8 and Delhi Belly at number 10 is just 5.7 crore rupees.
It's tiny.
We're talking about fractions of $1 million separating these films. If the top of the list was a marathon runner winning by an hour, the bottom of this list is 4 sprinters throwing their chests across the line.
That's exactly what it is.
How does the studio manage to squeeze out that final 5.7 crore to make sure they secure a spot on this list?
Well, at that level, every single tactical decision matters. It's about how aggressively you negotiate to hold onto theater screens in your 3rd and 4th weeks when new movies are coming out. It's about squeezing the final drops out of the overseas markets, maybe pushing for a wider release in the UK or the UAE. But look at the types of films at the bottom compared to the top.
Yeah, let's look at that.
You have The Dirty Picture, Murder 2, Delhi Belly. These were not traditional 4-quadrant family action films like Bodyguard or Singham.
No, not at all. They were much darker, heavily adult skewing, really controversial films.
Yeah.
Like Delhi Belly was famous for its profanity.
Yes.
And The Dirty Picture was a tragic, mature biopic.
Exactly. Their mechanism for hitting the list was completely different. They couldn't rely on mass appeal in single-screen Tier 3 cities.
Right.
They had to overperform in urban multiplexes. They relied on viral controversies, high-impact music, and intense word of mouth to keep those multiplex audiences buying high-priced tickets.
That makes a lot of sense.
But what the data truly solidifies here is the floor. It establishes the absolute baseline for what the industry defined as a top-tier success in 2011.
The 100 crore entry fee.
Oh.
If you didn't hit 103 crore, you simply didn't make the cut. You could have a movie that grossed 98 crore, which is an objective financial triumph that probably made its producers incredibly wealthy.
Oh, absolutely.
But structurally, historically, you were locked out of the room. You didn't matter in the context of the top 10.
And that floor isn't just an arbitrary round number. The 100 crore mark became mathematically essential because of the escalating costs of marketing.
Really? Just marketing?
Yeah. By 2011, the cost of acquiring television spots, taking out full-page newspaper ads, and organizing these huge multi-city promotional tours meant that the marketing budget alone could rival the actual production budget.
Wow.
So if a studio spent that kind of capital, a 70 or 80 crore gross meant they might barely break even after the theaters took their half.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah. Hitting 100 crore wasn't just a trophy, it was the financial threshold where a heavily marketed film actually started turning a meaningful, undeniable profit for the distributor.
It forces a brutal level of competition, doesn't it?
It really does.
You have these massive corporate entities at the top, throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at the board. And at the bottom, you have fragmented, smaller studios clawing for every last rupee just to clear the 100 crore watermark and justify their marketing spend.
Yep.
It shows you that this list isn't just a random assortment of popular movies. It's a highly structured, ruthless financial ecosystem.
And when you look at the raw data, the architectural blueprint becomes undeniable. You have Reliance Entertainment acting as the central bank, proving that massive diversified capital can simply buy market dominance.
Right.
You have the anomaly of Bodyguard, proving that true, astronomical success still requires bridging the gap between urban multiplexes and rural single screens.
Absolutely.
You have the syndication model of Ready, proving that collaboration is a viable shield against ruinous risk. And finally, you have the 103 crore baseline, the absolute minimum required to survive the ecosystem.
You know, by brushing the dust off these numbers, we stop seeing just movie posters and start seeing the machinery behind them. We see the venture capitalism, the risk mitigation, and the desperate scramble for screen space.
It's all there in the spreadsheet.
It completely changes how you view a film's success. But, you know, as we pack up our tools from this deep dive, there's a structural question that this data leaves us with.
The implications of that rigid 103 crore floor.
Right. We established that the absolute baseline to matter in 2011 was 103 crore. Hitting that number was the only way to survive the rising costs of marketing and multiplex distribution.
Yeah.
But if an industry establishes a rigid 9-figure financial floor just to be considered a success, what happens to the art?
It creates a mandate for safety.
Exactly.
Oh.
I mean, if you're a producer and you know you need at least 103 crore just to survive the year, do you stop taking creative risks?
You might have to.
Do you stop funding the weird experimental indie film and instead just start syndicating massive, safe, formulaic action movies? Because they're the only vehicles capable of hauling in 100 crore.
It's a very real concern.
As the financial floor keeps rising year after year, it forces us to ask, at what point does the cost of making a blockbuster become so high that the industry can no longer afford to be original?
That is the $1 million question, or I guess the billion rupee question.
Right. It's something for you to think about the next time you buy a ticket. The numbers on the spreadsheet change, but the pressure of that financial floor shapes every single frame of the movie you're watching.
Absolutely.
We've uncovered a lot today, but the dig never really ends. Keep looking at the numbers.